Hi there, I'm Dr. Francesca Zampollo, and in this video I will share with you everything most exciting that is going on in the world of food design right now through the eyes of Maud de Rohan Willner. Maud is a French and British food and experience designer, founder of Salty Studio. Inspired by the senses, society, and food culture, she loves to tell stories and create interactive experiences. Maud is also the host of Edible Words podcast, talking about past, current, and future food and design trends with people from around the world. I have asked Maud to join an industry project a while back, asking her to create a presentation that was then part of a bigger workshop. This is that presentation, and the content is so good that it had to be shared. This is one of the 7 presentations that were collected at that time. Enjoy the presentation, and as always, have a lovely day and happy food design.
So hi everyone, I'm Maud. I am the founder of Salty Studio. It's a creative food and experience design studio based in London. And my background is I've got a BA in sustainable product design from Falmouth University in England, and then I did a master's in food design and innovation in Milan. I'm half French and half English, and grew up most of my life in London, but I travel around quite a bit. So I love to explore different food cultures from around the world and understand different people's food behaviors. This is some examples of some of the work I've done. So it's mostly creative catering and menu design for brands and events. I've done lots of different things from cocktails to canapes to sit down experiences, and I'll go through a few examples. So here, I quite enjoy to explore food textures and looking at colors that are available naturally, and again textures and flavors. So I've often liked to experience with that for my different events. So so this is another project as well that I worked on, which was a collaboration with Cinzia, who's another food designer based in the UK. And we created the No Waste Republic, which was a sort of fictional project for the Food Design Festival in last year. And this project was just a really fun one. We got put together to create something for this festival. And we were both quite passionate about food waste, and we both have a background in design, so we were trying to think how could we use that and how can we combine that. And so we created this sort of fictional world where sort of like a utopic world where people would use and grow their own food products and then actually reuse them into materials or in different ways. So for example, using the avocado pit, we made this material mixed with air dry clay, and you can also use the avocado pit to dye fabric as well. Same thing with the skin. So we explored how to make some other materials as well with the skin. So that was just one example. But we sort of imagined this place where people would really create a whole life cycle around, especially with food and food waste. So then this next project I worked on, which was for the Dutch Design Week in collaboration with the Isla Design District. And for this one, again, I actually looked at disposable packaging and the big issue of waste. And for this, I created a series of pictures, a workshop and a panel talk. So this picture in particular was actually quite popular, which was just some edible cutlery I made with sort of like a bread dough. But I think the idea was to really get people to question the use of disposable packaging, and actually do we really need it in alternative ways that we could create more better products. And the workshop was to teach people how to make like chocolate and things like that. And then the panel talk we did, I hosted with my panel, which was Joanna Stevens from Space 10, and then I had Maxim, who runs Strudels, which is a pasta straw company, And then Laura Clarius from Edisaba University, and then Alice Potts from she's a biomaterial designer. So one of the things I've been doing in the past few years has been hosting panel talks, and I found that really interesting because you can ask the same question to different people and get different answers, and especially around the same topic, but people who have different points of views. So I think it's really interesting. So then this next example is again some of my work, which is a collaboration I did with a brand. So this is some of the examples of more of the catering side that I've done. So this was with House of Juriki, which is a subscription wellness box. And the idea, they wanted to create an event for influencers, and they and for this one, I sort of used the same. I tried to understand the brand values and the lifestyle values and their story, and create a food experience around that. So this is the menu that I had, all again around sort of healing foods, and using the colors of their color palette. So we had 3 little snacks, and then 2 sort of non-alcoholic cocktails for them. And I also hosted a workshop for them that day, because I created one of the products for the 2 products for one of the boxes, which was a edible food and edible face care workshop. So using natural and edible materials to create some face masks and face scrubs, which was quite fun. So again, sort of adding, I like to play with that sort of tactile element, tactile process. So then, so when I get asked about food design, um, and the different, what are the different elements of it? For me, so this is sort of an overview of how I see all the different methods, and then food culture, history, and our behaviors around food, storytelling around food, food science and molecular gastronomy, food in our mind, food sustainability, the environments of our food, what's on the table, and then packaging and graphic design, and then finally the Internet of Things. So I'll go into a few of these today, just most of them that are more relevant. Food design thinking to start. We have Francesca's work, of course, because I find in product design, I really see the clear correlation with food, and so when I started finding out about Francesca's work, for me, it made so much sense, and I think it's a really interesting process, that can be really valuable when you're trying to design new or improving better food products or improving the food system. I think it's really interesting to have this structure. And when I get client requests, I actually look at them like briefs, like design briefs, and I have a similar sort of thinking process where I go through a whole brainstorming and research periods, and then to try and figure out I often say all my different components for my menu. So I think it's quite important to have a look at this. So then the next discipline I want to look at is the food culture, history, and our behaviors around food. So this is a book that I've been really strongly inspired by, and I often mention it during different presentations, because it really shows how we have similar food cultures around the world. Of course, there are lots of differences, but I think it's sort of a way that we can connect with people around the world, and actually you can see that actually we are quite similar in some way in our cultures as well, and in our communities. So I think it's really important to take inspiration from how people are doing something similar but in a slightly different way, but also what works, and what are new ways to do things, or new for you but actually that already exist for a long time. And I think also to look at history and traditions around food. For me, that's so inspiring. There's a few other books as well that I always recommend, but another one called Rituals Around Food, Rituals of Food. So looking at all our rituals around the dining experience, what people used to do in the past, what we do now. I think it's just, really fascinating. So okay, so then storytelling in food. Again, this is for me quite an important part of designing around food. I think, and Julia mentioned that as well before. So this is some work by Sonia Vergès. She's a French food designer, and she created this these two projects, which were around the galette des rois, which is a Three Kings cake, which is eaten around the Epiphany, usually mostly in France. I've seen it in a few other countries, but and usually the shape is round, but here she's made it in the shape of a crown, because the idea is in the round shape you find the fève, which is the little ceramic piece on the left. So normally that is also a dry bean, and whoever gets it becomes the king or the queen, and then they have to choose their other king or queen. And so the way that if she's made it into the shape of a crown, which means that everyone can be a king or a queen by eating it. But she's also the fève, the little dry bean that she's made. It used to be put in the pie again, and it was a symbol of fertility, renewal, and rebirth. But actually, the whole story has been slightly forgotten because now we find ceramic objects, so obviously so they can survive the heat. But when the pie is baked, but now we can find these little ceramic objects in so many different shapes, so like toys and cars and famous figures, and even actually brand logos and things like that. And we've actually forgotten the story about it. So actually bringing back to the original shape and story. And she actually also made them in different colors that symbolized royalty at different moments in history. So I think that's quite an interesting one. So then this is another project by Imogen Kwok. So she's a food artist based in London, and I've recently met her, and she's been doing some really incredible work with a lot of fashion brands, so combining fashion and food, which I find again fascinating. I think more and more fashion brands are trying to create events and trying to incorporate food with for their customers and consumers. So I think that's quite interesting to see. And so here she did a wooden mooncake box. So the case included a jigsaw puzzle with the Louis logo, and then with also two pieces of mooncake. And it was around for the Lunar New Year, I think. So and then they also had two flower tea bags inside the case. So I thought it was really interesting because I think it's great to create a durable object that people can keep as well in their home and actually interact with. So I think that the jigsaw, the puzzle, I think it's sort of like a Chinese checkers game. I think is really interesting. So just again, it's a reminder of when people keep that at home, and you can keep using it for a while. So I think that's quite inspiring. And again, actually with Louis, I'm not sure if some of you have seen this project. So it's Belle Bossé, which is a food design studio based in Paris. And they collaborated with Louis as well, and created this pop-up in Selfridges. And Louis have had a whole collection of products and accessories based on the Howl's Moving Castle film. And so they created this pop-up with all these different food elements from the film. So again, talking about storytelling, I think this is a pretty good example. And I find it fascinating because they really made each element so detailed and a really interesting experience. So people could book a tea time experience there. And again, it's showing the possibilities of this fusion between food and fashion, but also you can merge food with anything, and that's again another side of food design that I find fascinating is you can merge two disciplines, and you never know what can happen at the end, and I think it's pretty magical what you can get. So I think it shows sort of the unlimited opportunities with around food as a material, and yeah. So then the next point is food sustainability. And this is something for me that's really important. And I only started really delving into that a bit more since I started doing my BA in sustainable product design. Funnily enough, when I first went for the interview, so that was in 2012, 2013, the course was called 3D design. And then I got told during the interview that they were changing it to sustainable product design. And I wasn't quite sure if I wanted to be labeled or to be associated with that at that time, because I think just around us in our environments, we were just not used to that yet, and it wasn't such a big thing. And it's just crazy to think that it's just 10 years ago, and now it's part of everyone's life, hopefully. So some of the projects I want to talk to you about is this one by Rose McAdoo. So um, she's someone that I've met only online so far, but hopefully I can meet her in person soon, because she's based in Alaska and in Antarctica. So she spends her time between both places. She's usually working on glaciers. And so she's a glacier guide in Alaska, and then in Antarctica she works on some science projects. But she has a really interesting passion around food, and she uses desserts to communicate science and educate people of all ages on these different places. And so she often tries to create food experiments in slightly unusual places. And for example, here there's a few where she shows the different layers of glaciers through food, which I find fascinating. She did like a whole dessert box as well with 5 different elements, showing again 5 different elements that you can find in glaciers. So I think these are really fun and inspiring because they are interesting for adults as well as children. So I think everyone of all ages can interact with these, and I think having the element of taste and flavor in eating it, I think sort of adds more value to the learning experience. So then again, around sustainability, I'm sure a lot of you have been following some projects around crickets and insects, replacing that as protein. And there on the right, there's a few facts about cricket flour. And then in the middle, this is a brand in the UK that I found. I actually tried them. They're really good. Don't taste the crickets at all. And but I think this particular topic is quite interesting because it still hasn't, we've been talking about it for years in Europe, but I don't feel like we're there yet. I think mentally, and we're not really, I think people are not too open yet to eating insects, whereas I feel like in other parts of the world it's such a normal thing. So I think again this is to do with food culture as well and our food behaviors. How and why I think it's interesting to question this. What makes us so different? Yeah, in regards to this. I think there's also the issue of regulations as well. So from what I've heard in Europe is that some regulations around insects is a bit tricky to get. So I think again that shows that actually it's not just, even if our perceptions change, there are some other it needs, and there are other areas where there needs to have some change happen. So then I actually just added this in after hearing Julia's presentation about some food packaging, because I thought that I heard about this brand and met them actually as with some of my previous work a few years ago, and I found that they were so interesting because they actually told me that a lot of tea bags have bleach and glue in them to keep them together. So a lot of people just throw them in the recycling or just in their compost even, but actually they're not compostable. And so they made sure that every part of their product and even the packaging is all compostable. So actually even the what looks like plastic for the packaging, because it needs to be watertight for the tea bags, is actually made of wood pulp. And that was the first time I'd seen something like that, this material, which again, so interesting. And then the packaging for the tea bags, they use cornstarch and they heat seal it, so there's no plastic or anything like that. So yeah, I think it's a really inspiring brand. So then around let me just find my notes again. So this is a project called Reverse Volumes by Misha Traxler's. It's a couple who work on different really interesting projects, I always find. So this one in particular, they were looking at the shapes in nature, available in nature, so fruit and vegetables, and sort of creating imprints and capturing imprints from these real fruits and vegetables. Um, and uh, and these vessels highlight all the various surfaces of nature, and I think they're quite interesting because you can look at them from a different perspective. So again, back to the sustainability, I think it's so interesting to see what is available outside in nature, and taking inspiration from that. So whether in color or texture. So then very briefly, this is just two other interesting projects, just looking at sort of textures and textures and for objects that you can find on the table, and playing around with our senses and what we can feel in our eating experience. I think there's a lot to look into for this. So looking into packaging again and graphic design and communication. So these are a few illustrations by Rocío Eguio. She is a illustrator based in Switzerland as well. And I really like her illustrations because it really adds a visual element to articles and books and stories. She loves to work with food, so we connect a lot around that. And I think it's a really fun way to visualize a story a bit further. And then this packaging by Tomorrow Machine I found that a few years ago, and I think it's really inspiring because again they were some of the first to create pretty innovative solutions for packaging. So on the left it's made of beeswax, so this is the dry ingredients. In the middle you have uh, packaging for oil-based products, and it's made of caramelized sugar and then covered with a layer of beeswax. And then on the right, it's agar-agar, and it's made for fruit and dairy products. So actually, the product inside evolves with the material, and it shows the durability of the product itself. So when it runs out of then the agar-agar disappears as well. So I think it's fascinating because in the well, the food packaging again, it's so innovative, and they're trying to create less waste and using actually natural resources, which are already available. So might as well use them. And then again on natural materials, this is Ohos by Notpla. So Notpla are a seaweed-based packaging company. They're a startup. So they mostly use seaweed. At the moment, it's because it's easy to grow, it's compostable, biodegradable, much faster than plastic, well, obviously than plastic, and it's waterproof actually, and has a lot of water sealing benefits. So they've created other materials such as films, coatings, and paper. And they try to work with, they've got a partnership at the moment with Just Eat. So with takeaway boxes, they've created a biodegradable lining instead of paper cardboard boxes. So again, I think that's another company that's really creating change, and especially with such a big industry of takeaway, I think is pretty inspiring. So one of the last topics is the Internet of Things. So Julia mentioned earlier InFarm as well. So Fried Farms is another company that do use hydroponics. There I be present in food deserts, so places where growing food is really hard to well, the food system is really hard. Well, it's really hard to grow food there. So whether it's really hot or dry or cold, and just to provide access to healthy and fresh food in some places where they might just have access to frozen or highly processed fast foods. They also have the concept is that they sell the containers to different cities, localities, but also to around schools. So they have a few that the children then can learn as well how food can grow. So there's an educational side as well. Obviously, as Julia said earlier, the energy consumption can be questioned a bit, but I think it's interesting to question what do you do if I mean, there's more and more people living in places where you can't grow food. So what are the solutions? And perhaps this is an interesting one to look at. Again, around the Internet of Things, I did want to mention the influence of social media, because I think that on food and our food behaviors, I think that's definitely a big part of it. I think that there's been a lot of food trends and viral recipes that have gone around, and it's interesting to see how that is going to affect next generations. There's a lot of new people and influencers who are talking about or sharing recipes on plant-based dishes and things like that, which is pretty interesting to see the effect that that has. But then you also another side of social media, which I find again pretty fascinating, is how you can see cultures from around the world without actually leaving your own country. So there are people sharing their experiences and lifestyles, and food is part of that, from pretty remote places and cultures that could have been disappearing, and now we're hearing a bit more about them. So I think that's quite interesting. Then last two topics is the future of food, because you always have to question what's going to happen next. So this is the Future Meatball, which is a project that was done by Space 10. They're based in Copenhagen. Space 10 is it's a research and design lab by IKEA, and they're on a mission to create a better everyday life for people and the planet. So these are all the Future Meatball that this project that they created. Another one is made with lab-grown meat. Another one uses is 3D printed. So they have a few different examples of how they view perhaps the future meatball to be like. Again, I think it's interesting to question and to think what does the future hold for us. So mushrooms as a material has been pretty. I've been seeing that quite a bit in some different projects. So on the top left, these are lampshades made of mycelium. So there are a few restaurants that are trying to really push further in their on the sustainability side. So even from the food, but also all the way to the design and their interior spaces. So Stylo in London, that's where I've seen some of these. It's a restaurant where they are really trying to push the whole life cycle of their restaurant. And they have no bins. They have they're trying to compost everything and trying to use reuse materials. So they reuse the wine bottles they have in their restaurants. They grind them and make them into a powder and then make plates out of them, things like that. So, and they had some of these lamps. Seed Lip on the right as well. They are doing, it's a non-alcoholic spirits brand, and they used mycelium to create a nice gift packaging box. So I think that was pretty nice. And then again with mushrooms in a slightly different way, mycotechnology. They have been using mushrooms as a sweetener to add in different products. So in chocolate, for example. So I think interesting to keep an eye on what they're doing. So just to focus a bit around children, here are a few different projects that I found pretty inspiring. This is Plain Choc. So they're sort of like a sustainable Kinder Egg version. Their idea is to try and combine the excitement of playing and eating chocolate. And they also have these little collectible 3D toys that are obviously recyclable. And so children can collect them. The chocolate is dairy free and allergy free as well, and organic. So I think that's interesting to see some of these new products appearing. So just to talk back again about Rocío, her illustrations, I think for children in particular, any sort of visual communication is quite important because a lot of them can't read yet or can't read very well, depending on their age. So I think if you can try and communicate anything through visual illustrations, I think that could be quite an interesting way. So, for example, on the right, this was the effects of healthy food on our mind. So I think maybe sometimes that can have more effect. Yeah. And then this was an exhibition by the V&A called Eat Me, and they had some edible posters and edible tickets to eat, which I wish I had been to that exhibition. I think it sounds really fun, even as adults. And the idea was they actually collaborated with Bompas and Par as well, which is a food design studio in London. And they asked children to use their imagination to invent their ultimate food fantasies at a free workshop. So for me, children have imaginations, and it's so important to nurture this as much as we can, because when you grow up, you often don't get to use that imagination much more. So I think sometimes their point of view on life can be very different to ours, and we can learn a lot from them. The last project I'm going to talk about, which is projects just on a touch on cutlery for children and design of tools for the kitchen. I think it's so important to try and involve children in cooking, and that's one of the easiest ways to get them to know how to eat healthy, and to educate them about how to eat well. So on the right, you've got a little kit by Opinel, which is one of like brand of kids, and it's a kit for children to use safely, which I think is great, without making them look too childish, so they sort of feel like they've been taken seriously. Just an set, and it was designed ergonomically to be perfect for ages 2 to 10 years old. It was actually introduced in 1975, but they're still producing them, so they've become quite iconic. So yeah, that is it from me.